Back here with Quick Bytes with Sir Anthony. And today, Anthony, you want to talk more on the Parousia, which is the belief held for now 2 millennia.
Yes.
That the Lord Jesus is currently in heaven, alive as a glorified immortal man, and he promised that he would come back.
Yes.
And it's popularly been paraphrased Parousia as the second coming.
Yes.
And you want to talk more specifically, let's see, this is 2 Thessalonians 2. So Paul here writes to the church regarding a man of lawlessness who will be revealed in verse 3. And this man of lawlessness has his own parousia, his own coming.
Yes.
And then he says that for the time being, this is hidden. It's a hidden power of lawlessness or iniquity, but it's already at work in spirit form. And then he will be revealed in verse 8, this person, we believe it's a person. And then it says, whom the Lord, that would be the Lord Jesus, will destroy, verse 8, by the breath of his mouth and wipe out by the manifestation of his own arrival.
Yes.
So you want to talk there about the word arrival.
Yes. The teaching of Jesus in regard to the future is a very large proportion of what Jesus taught. And people who say, well, I don't do prophecy, or they don't choose not to do prophetic things, are simply denying a large portion of what Jesus taught for us to believe. In Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, you have an account of the second coming of Jesus and the preliminary signs of its arrival. We are in a grand muddle. I'm using a term, I think, which really understates the situation. A chaos, a dementia, I would say, in regard to the simple fact that in the Bible there's one single future parousia. Perhaps we should start using the Greek word, which is found in our New Testament text, regarding the second coming of Jesus, what we call the second coming of Jesus, his return to the earth from heaven. Parousia is the Greek word. Arrival, not vaguely presence, although when you arrive, of course, you are present. But it's not an invisible thing. There's one single second coming, parousia. And Matthew 24 mentions it immediately after the great tribulation of those days. Christ will be seen arriving at his parousia. The word parousia occurs in that 24th chapter of Matthew, also in 2 Thessalonians and 1 Thessalonians. The great point to be made here is that Paul is reflecting exactly the same teaching as Jesus. Paul, in fact, speaks of a word from the Lord, and he knew these teachings. Of course he did. He wrote them down earlier than the Gospels were written down, probably. But this was common knowledge and understanding. Christ would return one time, not twice, not invisibly, followed by 7 years later, a visible coming. Now, the 7-year period at the end, the 70th heptad of Daniel, is fine. That was well held by the early Christian premillennial people in 1st and 2nd and 3rd centuries. That's very clear. But what was not held at that time, and not until 1830, was this idea even imagined, namely that Christ would come back in 2 different stages. It's very easy to show that this cannot be true. The word parousia is equated in Paul's writings with the day of the Lord. It's equated with the catching up to meet the Lord in the air. In 1 Thessalonians 4, Paul is speaking about the catching up, what is now known as the rapture. So here's the problem. The word rapture has now been stolen and misled many, many people because it's been used to define another second coming which isn't in the scriptures. There's only one second coming, one parousia, one catching up to meet the Lord in 1 Thessalonians 4. Paul actually calls it in verse 15 there, 1 Thessalonians 4:15. He calls it the parousia. That's what it is. And it is also the catching up. So what has been happening is this. people have created a new noun that's not there, rapture. There's no noun rapture. There is a catching up right here in 1 Thessalonians 4, but it's exactly the same as the parousia in verse 15. And throughout Thessalonians, it's very obvious that Paul is facing the same problem of confusion that the Thessalonians were facing. Namely, they thought the day of the Lord was already there. That was a huge mistake which Paul needed to correct. In 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 5, Paul says, don't you remember how often I used to explain all this to you? Have you forgotten what I used to tell you? Well, that was 2,000 years ago. We need it just as much today. In 2 Thessalonians 2, that verse 5 there explains it. I used to tell you, I frequently explained all this stuff to you. We haven't listened, because Paul's whole point there is that the man of sin, the lawless one, a single individual, Antichrist, if you like, and abomination of desolation standing where he, masculine pronoun, in Mark 13:14, that person must precede the second coming. There cannot be a parousia of Jesus to immortalize the saints before the arrival of the man of sin. The order is precise. Jesus said the same thing. Before the second coming, you have the great tribulation, you have the man of sin, you have the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to. This is utterly clear. So to say that Jesus could come back at any second now, any moment, before the appearance of the man of sin, abomination of desolation, is to contradict absolutely flat the plain teachings of Paul and Jesus, who are in perfect and total agreement here.
Right, and note just quickly, Anthony, that the arpazo,
yes,
the snatched up, that's literally the Greek. This is the Net Bible. It says caught up.
Yes.
But the other thing, if you want to make a comment about this, is that we're caught up, we're snatched to meet the Lord in the air, not to go to heaven, but it's to meet the Lord in the air.
That's exactly right. The classic book on this, and I would recommend everybody try to read it. It's online now, I believe. Alexander Rees, The Approaching Advent of Christ. It's an absolute classic. Have your children read it. Read it yourself. This man was incensed at what he came to see was the error of what he'd been taught as a child, that Christ would come back in two parousias. Now, they don't want to use that language, but that's what amounts to the discussion. He'll come back twice. No, he only comes back once. So do read The Approaching Advent of Christ by Alexander Rees, a New Zealander by birth, and a tremendous advocate of the single future second coming. So I think these classic books need to be restored. It's online, fortunately now, difficult to obtain, but a wonderful exposition. Then the other one would be by Robert Gundry, The Church and the Tribulation, where he sets out to make the point that I'm making here, that two parousias is one too many. There's only one resurrection of the dead. That's at the seventh trumpet in Revelation 11:15 to 18. The seventh trumpet. Guess what? That's the same as the last trumpet in 1 Corinthians 15. It couldn't be clearer. But my goodness, we managed to garble the most easy things. And once this idea catches on that Jesus can come back privately and secretly 7 years before his actual parousia, that is enormously popular now. It's simply wrong. And you can show that. You can demonstrate it to yourself and your family so easily by simply looking at the expression parousia, second coming. Another word is epiphania, which is the appearance of Christ, exactly the same. And we'll finish by proving that from 2 Thessalonians 2:8. Jesus is going to destroy, slay, kill the man of sin, the Antichrist, by the outshining, the epiphania of his parousia. It's the same event. By no means can those two things be pulled apart to create an event which is non-existent. It's not going to happen. And many millions might be frightfully disappointed when they do not see a pseudo second coming, as it turns out to be, which is not going to happen. They won't see it. Only one parousia, and it happens immediately after the Great Tribulation, when Jesus arrives in power and glory at his single parousia, epiphania, by which he's going to slay the Antichrist and all the evil people.